Cool, a Star Trek convention.
Melvar, can you give us some idea of how long this is going to last?
Until time stops.
You can't do this.
Now, we have a full schedule of events.
Can people who hate Star Trek leave?
Good question.
No, you have to stay even longer.
No.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Classic Comics Trek Talk live stream. So it's been a little while. 3 months to be exact. I had to step away in mid-August. As I mentioned at the time, I'm in a graduate program, and so I just had to focus my time and energy there. So, picking back up though, going to be hopefully running. So I'm at the halfway point on season 2 on Star Trek, and hopefully I will be able to finish up season 2 by the end of January, I hope, because by then I'll be getting busy again and we'll probably have to step away again, at least for a few weeks. We'll see at that time how it all looks. Okay, so tonight, taking a look at the original Star Trek series episode, Obsession. This is episode 46 in production order, although it is sometimes listed as episode 47, and I'll get into that and when I go through the background information. So as always, I'll be reading from Mark Cushman's book. These are the voyages for behind the scenes info on the episode. Now, this episode written by Art Wallace, directed by Ralph Sineski. And this is from an NBC press release issued November 15th, 1967. Captain's Kirk career and the safety of the Enterprise are jeopardized by his compulsion to destroy a cloud-like creature which previously killed some of the crew in Obsession on the NBC television network's Star Trek, Friday, December 15th. While prospecting for a rare ore, Captain Kirk recognizes an odor which reminds him of an incident 12 years before. That really doesn't come across sounding well, does it? I mean, at that time, his captain and 200 crew members were killed by a gaseous mass. Yeah, I'll bet they were. Kirk dispatches Ensign Rizzo to destroy the cloud. Rizzo lives just long enough to confirm Kirk's suspicions. Ensign Garovic, Rizzo's replacement, is the son of the captain that was killed in the first attack. He too is almost killed when the cloud invades the Enterprise. Kirk then uses human bait against the creature. I forgot my, got my banner. There it is. All right. Hey, Gwagnar. Hello, sir. Good to see you. Always glad to have you here. Thank you for stopping by. Okay, driven by guilt, Kirk delays a delivery of emergency vaccines to pursue an old nemesis, which lives on red blood cells. The human bait is Kirk himself. The theme to Obsession is identified in its title. Guilt and revenge are examined through the actions and reactions of Kirk and Garovic. And this is an interesting episode because I think it's the first one that really kind of dives into that whole sort of Moby Dick, kind of obsession metaphor, sort of theme that Star Trek has done very well. Most famously, of course, in Wrath of Khan, but you could also look at Picard with the Borg. And I'm sure there are other episodes that I could identify if I took the time to think about them. Now, Obsession is a clever spin on Moby Dick. It is taut and traumatic, with strong personal conflicts. Roddenberry had always seen Kirk as a futuristic Captain Horatio Hornblower. Here he becomes a 23rd century Captain Ahab as well. Using Moby Dick as a model, the action elements of the story are intentionally kept simple. The complexities of the material rest with the characters. Kirk and Garovic are determined to punish themselves for not living up to their own impossible expectations. and the nature of guilt and human emotion are examined by the observations of a well-meaning and intellectually curious Spock, who tells McCoy, quote, I require an opinion. There are aspects of human irrationality I do not yet comprehend. Obsession, for one, the persistent single-minded fixation on one idea. McCoy's delightful reaction, you need advice from me, I need a drink. Those watching the episode may need a drink as well, and Wallace's script, with substantial contributions by Gene Roddenberry, Gene Coon, and to a lesser extent, John Meredith Lucas, is a well-crafted, exciting tale for the first 3 quarters. However, both momentum and overall effectiveness falter in the final act as some scenes become repetitive and others fail to meet Star Trek's high standards. Of the redundant beats in a strange sequence of scenes that almost feel like the script padding, Spock has deduced, since phasers can't stop the creature, that Kirk and Garrovick are wrong in blaming themselves for the deaths of others. His observations are ignored by both Kirk and Garrovick, but then later Kirk too realizes phasers are useless against the cloud, and then he explains to Garrovick that they have no blood on their hands. This dramatic and sensitive moment between Kirk and Garrovick would have been more effective if the scene between Spock and Kirk, especially the latter one between Spock and Garrovick, were eliminated. As to the unbelievable aspects of story and character, Garrovick is immature, slow to comprehend, and prone to sulking. Yet he is also somehow the chief of security. If Obsession had maintained its quality and dramatic integrity throughout, it might be considered among Star Trek's best, rather than merely slightly above run-of-the-mill. Okay, so as mentioned, the original story by Art Wallace, and he did the original screenplay, but this one went through a lot, and I mean a lot of rewrites. And Gene Coon, Gene Roddenberry, and John Meredith Lucas, as mentioned, all had a hand in it. I'm not going to go through every iteration of the script, so I mean it's really kind of tedious, and a lot of it is just minor changes. Art Wallace came to Star Trek with strong credentials. He wrote for Roddenberry's The Lieutenant as well as Shatner's 1965 series For the People. And in science fiction, he wrote for Tom Corbett's Space Cadet and The Invaders. Immediately prior to this, he spent 2 years working as co-creator and head writer for Dark Shadows. So I didn't know that. He co-created Dark Shadows. He was also a friend of Gene Roddenberry. Quote, Gene and I were having dinner one night, said Wallace, and then it came to me that it wouldn't be a bad idea to do a version of Moby Dick, which wound up becoming Obsession. I just substituted the cloud for the whale. In Moby Dick, Herman Melville's 1951 classic, Captain Ahab, who on a previous expedition lost his leg to the whale known as Moby Dick, is consumed by his obsession for revenge against the beast. On April 22nd, 1966, months before Star Trek had even premiered on NBC, Roddenberry was dictating story notes for a story he called Space Moby Dick. Quote, it's the story of Captain Kirk becoming almost obsessed with the necessity to follow and kill the thing. This obsession, which we will strongly motivate on an emotional level, leads Kirk to diverting from his mission and normal duties as a starship commander, possibly even risking his vessel, more men, and his career. Somewhere in the story, he will, of course, realize that what he is doing is wrong and must pull back from it. But by that time, he will be unable to. The battle has been joined with the thing, and he must carry on to the conclusion. That's all Wallace and Roddenberry had in the beginning. The thing was still undefined, as was Kirk's backstory. But even at its embryonic stage, Roddenberry knew that he liked the premise. Okay, now there was a snag, though. John D.F. Black, who was the story editor for Star Trek early on, he cautioned Roddenberry in a memo, quote, Gene, the above-mentioned piece is right, or rather is very similar to Ray Bradbury's Moby Dick 1999, which I mentioned to you before. We need to tread carefully here. So Ray Bradbury had written a story called Moby Dick 1999, which had been originally for a TV movie, I think originally. with a comet taking the place of the whale. But it didn't get on TV. It wound up actually becoming a radio broadcast on the BBC, starring Christopher Lee, no less. And then he did eventually publish it as a short story in 2007. Now, letting the story go or letting a more renowned science fiction writer get away was a great sacrifice for Roddenberry and Star Trek. But Roddenberry had an ethic which told them that whoever brought the story to his attention first got the assignment, even when it meant missing an opportunity to have Ray Bradbury write a script for the series. And, I'd always wonder why Ray Bradbury never did an episode of Star Trek, and that, I guess, helps explain it. There was no way to predict that Star Trek would even survive to see a second season or third season. Justman was dodging a bullet and hoping Roddenberry would forget about this whale of a tale. Because Justman didn't want to do the episode because he feared it was going to be too expensive. But in late March of 1967, NBC approved a cash advance for more story development in the anticipation of producing a second season. Roddenberry had not forgotten the idea and had Wallace go ahead and begin writing it. And they had done something similar before with Kirk being obsessed, and wanting to get basically wanting to confront somebody, in conscience of the king, with the character of Anton Caridian. But as they note in the book, that was really more of drama, and Obsession is more of a kind of action story. Now, again, they get into the rewrites. I'm not going to get bogged down in too much of that because we'd be here all night, and most of it really just isn't all that interesting, to be honest. Okay, so Kuhn tried his hand at a rewrite. The final draft, which was dated September 6, 1967. Then, as he prepared to step down as series producer, the problematic material had to be put aside until Kuhn chose John Meredith Lucas to take over the job of reading the long and highly critical memos from Roddenberry and Robert Justman. So at this point, NBC ordered 2 more episodes, basically for them to do while the network decided, are we going to finish the second season of Star Trek, or are we just going to cancel this thing mid-season? Now, at that point, they had 13 teleplays that they could produce. Those were The Omega Glory by Gene Roddenberry, Portrait in Black and White by Barry Trivers, which I've talked about before and you may have heard of. Basically, this was a script for an episode that, of course, wound up never being made, where the Enterprise goes to a planet where white people are enslaved by black people, basically. Tomorrow the Universe by Paul Schneider. He Walked Among Us by Norman Spinrad. And then Gene Kuhn had apparently done a rewrite of He Walked Among Us. The Gamesters of Triskelion by Margaret Arman. Return to Tomorrow by John T. Duggan. Obsession by Any Other Name by Jerome Bixby. The Expatriates by David Harmon, which would eventually become a piece of the action. Another episode by Darlene Hartman called Shoal, I guess that's how you say it. The Immunity Syndrome by Robert Sabaroff. And then another version of the Omega Glory that was written by Les and Tina Pines. They wound up opting to produce Obsession and Gamesters of Triskelion. Lucas was particularly fond of Obsession because Captain Kirk was portrayed as a driven and somewhat darker character. He later said, quote, "If there was one element that I brought back to the show when I was producer because it had been lost a little bit, it was Gene Roddenberry's inspiration for the series, Horatio Hornblower." Lucas sent Obsession to DeForest Research for coverage. So if you've listened to my previous streams, DeForest Research was the company that they used basically to kind of look over the science stuff in the series, and decide, is the technical stuff, is the physics right, and stuff like that. And obviously most of it was not. They were making stuff up, but basically DeForest Research kind of helped them to make it sound believable or sound consistent, at least. And they also would warn them about potential like copyright violations and stuff like that. Now, Joan Pierce, who was one of their researchers, after consulting with the firm's science expert Pete Sloman, filed a report on September 29th, 1967. She took exception to some of the lines, including a line about how it moves through the rapid contraction and expansion of unstable elements. And she had them alter that line. Then there's a line about shock waves hitting the ship, and she mentions, shock waves can't travel through the void of space, so that should go. Okay, so here's one. So this is also the first episode that mentions the starship Farragut, in that part of Kirk's history. And she recommended, well, I'll just read it here. So she said, nomenclature for starships has previously indicated qualities, e.g., Enterprise, with names of historical personages being used for the shuttlecraft. I suggest changing the name of the ship to Endeavor. Okay. Oh, and then there was Roddenberry did make a change here. So he's in the original or one of the earlier versions of the script. When Spock is attacked by the creature, it nearly kills him, but he survives. And Roddenberry said, we've kind of done this bit where where Spock seems to die, or and there's the one where he gets blinded and all that, and then of course he turns out fine, and we play it all up really dramatically. We've kind of done this, so why don't we just kind of play this one for a bit of a laugh instead? Now, primarily, Roddenberry wanted the character of Nurse Chapel added to the story. Big surprise there. As he was often wont to do, he did a rewrite that put Nurse Chapel into the story, and he paid himself a nice $2,500 fee for his trouble. And the role of security officer Rizzo was split into two parts, with Rizzo being killed after the first attack and then replaced by Garavik, the son of Kirk's former commander. John Meredith Lucas handled the page revisions to follow on October 5, 6, 11, and 12. The script could have used one more rewrite to remove some of the redundancy in the latter half and to strengthen the character of Garavik, but there was no time. Filming of the episode had actually begun on October 9th, at the halfway point between the four sets of revisions by Lucas. And of course, if you've been following my series here, this was a common thing. They were often just, rewriting the episode, even as it was being written. Okay, so we'll get into the episode itself here before I get back to the behind the scenes stuff and the production. Okay, so we begin the episode with the Enterprise in orbit around a planet called Argus 10, and they are there looking for tritanium, which we are told is 20 times stronger than diamond, which is kind of funny because at one point Kirk, kind of hits this rock here and it it just sounds hollow. It sounds like hollow plaster or something. Now, they do find a confirmed vein of the mineral, and Spock uses his phaser to cut off a sample. Now, while this is happening, they don't notice a strange vapor that seems to be collecting in the area. And then Kirk says that he smells something, a sickly sweet odor like honey, and he asks Spock if he smells it, which Spock doesn't. And he tells Spock that he encountered a creature years earlier that had a similar odor. Kirk orders some red shirts to make a security sweep of the area, telling them to fire their phasers if they encounter a strange cloud. As they search, the red shirts are attacked by the cloud of vapor. I kind of cut off the top here. You can kind of see it here in the top of the picture. And they are attacked by it. And then Rizzo calls Kirk, but then he is attacked as well. Now, Kirk and Spock arrive to find two of the red shirts dead. And you see their deathly pale hair. Now, I don't know if you recognize him, but this is Eddie Paskey right here, who I've talked about before. He was Kirk's lighting double on the show, and he also had a recurring role as Ensign. Is it Ensign? Or no, Lieutenant Kelly, I believe it was. And of course, he died here. I'm pretty sure he's died in other episodes too. I think he dies like 3 or 4 times over the show, but he always seems to come back. But as you can see, he's very, they're both, they have very pale skin because we eventually learn that the creature feeds on red blood cells. Okay, so Obsession, again, written by Art Wallace and directed by Ralph Sineski. Okay, now back on the Enterprise, Spock suggests that they should depart because they have a rendezvous to make with the USS Yorktown. The Enterprise is carrying some vaccines, which are urgently needed on I forget the planet, but they're urgently needed on another planet where there's a plague or something. And the vaccines are also highly perishable. I guess they don't have refrigeration. I don't know. But anyway, there's a ticking clock here. They got this other assignment and they've been ordered to do. It's time sensitive, but instead Kirk says, "We're not going anywhere." He decides he's going to stay and find this thing because, well, I mean, he doesn't say it yet, but he wants to destroy this creature. Now, of course, Spock and particularly McCoy are taken aback by this because, again, there are a lot of lives at stake and people are depending upon them to deliver this vaccine. Now, Kirk asks McCoy about the autopsy on the dead crewmen, and McCoy reveals that all of them had all their red blood cells are gone, but they have no wounds or marks on them. And he doesn't understand how it could have happened. As he says, what happened to them seems medically impossible. Kirk tells McCoy to review the records of the USS Farragut from 11 years ago, as its crew experienced a series of similar deaths. Then Kirk tells McCoy to awaken Ensign Rizzo, and Kirk asks him if he noticed a strange smell like honey, and Rizzo says that he did, but then he falls unconscious without being able to say anything more. Oh, and also I would notice when they awaken him, they use cordrazine to awaken Rizzo from his unconscious state. And of course, that was the drug in The City on the Edge of Forever that McCoy accidentally, injected himself with, and it drove him nuts. So a bit of consistency there. Okay, now on the bridge, Uhura tells Kirk that a message has arrived for him from Starfleet, basically telling him to, deliver those vaccines. Kirk disregards it and tells Uhura to summon the head of security to the bridge. Now, Spock says that he has scanned the planet and found nothing unusual, noting that Kirk told him to scan for dichromium and he didn't detect any. Kirk suggests that what they're looking for may know that it's being looked for and that it can maybe camouflage itself to hide from scans. Spock suggests that to be able to do that, it would need to change its fundamental molecular structure at will. Now, the security officer arrives, and it is Ensign Garevik. Now, as we eventually learn, Kirk knew Garevik's father. Garevik was the captain of the Farragut, and he was Kirk's first commanding officer. And I don't think they say it, but you get the impression that Kirk, admired Captain Garevik a great deal. And a big part of his guilt is that he wasn't able to prevent Captain Garevik from being killed by this thing. He asks Ensign Garevik, if he expects any treatment because, Kirk knew his father. Garevik says, "No, I don't." And Kirk says, "You'll get none here, mister." Then Uhura informs Kirk that Ensign Rizzo has died. Then Kirk tells Garevik to assemble a 4-man security team that will beam down to the planet with him. Now, back on the planet, they use tricorders and they detect dichromium. And Kirk tells Garevik to take 2 red shirts and approach from one direction while he does the same from the opposite direction to surround it. So Garevik and these other 2 go looking, and again, it kind of creeps up from behind a boulder again, and it attacks these other 2 red shirts and kills them. Kirk arrives and finds the 2 red shirts dead. Now, back on the Enterprise, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. And again, you can see they've got all the, or at least this guy does. This one, you can kind of tell he doesn't have the pale makeup on. But again, they've been drained of their red blood cells. So Kirk, Spock, and McCoy question Garevik about what happened, and Garevik reveals that he hesitated when he first saw the creature before firing his phaser. And Kirk is angered by this and tells Garevik that he is relieved of duty and confines him to quarters until further notice. And Garevik goes to his quarters, and throws him. And he is pretty pouty, he really is kind of like a pouty teen. He goes into the cabin and he just throws himself on his bed and he throws his arm over his face very dramatically. Okay, now on the bridge, Scotty asks when they'll be leaving, and Kirk tells him that they're not leaving yet. When Scotty questions this, Kirk angrily suggests that the senior officers are conspiring against him. Then he asks Chekhov if he's had any success scanning for the creature. Now, when Chekhov admits that he hasn't, Kirk scolds him before storming off the bridge. Spock approaches McCoy and he reveals that the USS Farragut saw similar deaths 11 years ago and that the crew included the captain, who was the father of Ensign Garevik, and also a young Lieutenant James Kirk on his first deep space mission. He gives McCoy a computer file suggesting that McCoy take a look at it. Now later, McCoy comes to Kirk's quarters and reveals that he knows Kirk encountered this creature on the Farragut 11 years ago. He also reveals that the records show Kirk hesitated, just like Garevik did, and he is preparing a report regarding Kirk's competence to command the ship. He reveals that he needs an officer who will serve as a witness to his medical report, and of course, we learn that it is Spock. Now, they again ask Kirk why they are delaying and rendezvousing with the Yorktown, again noting that the vaccine's the Yorktown. Or I'm sorry, I had it backward. It's the Yorktown that has the vaccines, then they're going to hand them off to the Enterprise. I'm sorry, I had it backwards. And they are sorely needed on Theta 7. Now, Kirk says he is convinced that the creature that killed his crewmen is the same one that attacked the Farragut years earlier, and that it isn't just some mindless predator. He's convinced that this creature is evil, and it must be stopped. Then Chekhov contacts Kirk and says that he has detected the creature leaving the planet and heading out into space. So Kirk orders a red alert and they all head to the bridge. Now the creature heads into space at high warp so fast that the Enterprise is actually struggling to keep up with it. I believe it's going at warp 8, and that's a difficult thing for the Enterprise to do for a long period of time. It does seem like this episode was clearly cut down quite a bit. There was clearly more to it. There's a number of kind of abrupt cuts from one scene to another. And this is kind of one of them. We go from Kirk and Spock and McCoy heading to the bridge. Then we cut to the bridge. They're already chasing the creature and they're already been at high speed for a while. And there's a couple of other cuts like that later. So it was obviously edited down significantly. Now, Spock reports that the creature seems to be in a set of flux between matter and energy, not quite registering as either one. And it traveling at such high speed makes it difficult to target it with the phasers because they can't get close enough to actually shoot the thing. there, and this, of course, this is redone effects from the remastered versions. In the original, it was much more kind of like a sparkly cloud. Of course, there were a number of episodes that had the sparkly cloud in it. And then Scotty warns that the engines cannot take any more, Captain, and may explode if they don't reduce speed. So reluctantly, Kirk orders the Enterprise to slow down to warp 6. Now, while this is going on, okay, here we go. Now, while this is going on, Chapel brings Ensign Garavik a meal, but he's still pouty and insists that he isn't hungry. She warns him that the meal is part of Dr. McCoy's care plan for him, and if he doesn't eat it, he'll have to deal with the doctor. Now, eventually, the creature slows down, dropping to warp 2, and then Kirk tells Chekhov to charge the phasers and prepare for an attack. Now, in his quarters, Garavik examines the meal, then gets upset, and he takes the kind of plate cover, the covering on the plate that keeps the food warm, off, and he throws it across the room, and it hits the ventilation control panel and accidentally hits the switch and opens up the vent or something like that. And by the way, when I was doing research for the episode, so apparently, when you have those plates with a cover on it, the cover on a plate is called a cloche or cloche, I guess. Maybe it's French, but that's a plate cover, a cloche. So there's your fun fact of the day. Now, then there's a red alert as the creature begins to attack the ship, and then Garavik charges out of his quarters and heads to the bridge. So Kirk orders Chekhov to fire phasers at it, but yeah, the thing is a cloud, so the phasers just pass straight through it. It's kind of odd how they're so surprised by this. It's like you would kind of figure it's a cloud, it would probably not be hurt by phasers, but they seem all really surprised by that. So then Kirk orders them to try with photon torpedoes, so they fire torpedoes, also to no effect. Then the cloud charges at the ship, and then Scotty warns them that something has entered the ship through one of the impulse engine vents. Now, and again, there's another abrupt cut here. Then later, it cuts from this to Kirk, Scotty, McCoy, and Spock in the conference room, and Scotty says that the creature's in the ventilation system, and they've kind of closed off the ventilation system, so it's stuck in there, presumably. But still, they've got this thing in the ship, and they're not sure what to do. And I believe Kirk suggests flushing some radiation or something like that into the ventilation shafts to drive it out, I think. Now, McCoy chides Kirk for insisting on pursuing the creature, but Spock suggests that the phasers, Kirk should stop punishing himself and arguing over the wisdom of chasing the creature because, they've already done it. There's no point bickering about it. And they've also seen that the phasers don't harm it. So Kirk should really stop feeling guilty or punishing himself for not being able to stop the creature all those years ago. And, this is an interesting thing in the episode here because repeatedly Spock seems to go out of his way to basically try and make people feel better and say, hey man, it's not your fault. You didn't do nothing wrong. And, it's a little uncharacteristic of Spock, particularly, I mean, it's one thing with Kirk, but he'll do the same thing later with Garavik. And I remember watching the episode and finding that kind of surprising. Why would Spock go out of his way to go to Garavik's quarters and basically try to give him the Vulcan equivalent of a pep talk, really? But anyway, Kirk dismisses his observation, saying he needs to focus on his ship and his crew. So then Spock goes to Garrovick, and he begins to tell Garrovick pretty much the same thing, that he shouldn't punish himself for what happened when he hesitated, because, phasers don't hurt it. It wouldn't have made any difference. But while they're talking, the creature begins to enter Garrovick's quarters through the open vent. Now, when they see it, Spock grabs Garrovick and throws him out of the room. Then he tries to seal the vent, and the switch literally just breaks off in his hands. So yeah, you would think the Federation's craftsmanship would be a little better, but whatever. So he can't seal the vent, and then he does the logical thing, and he flees from the quarters. No, actually, I'm kidding. He doesn't do that. Instead, he just tries to cover it with his hands, which obviously won't work. So again, kind of uncharacteristic for Spock here. I mean, he's got to know, putting my hand over the vent is not going to stop it. Now, Garrovick contacts the bridge and lets Kirk know that the creature's in his quarters, and Spock is in there too. Kirk orders Scotty to reverse pressure in the ventilation shaft, I believe is what and it sucks the creature back out of the quarters, out of the cabin through the ventilation vent. Now, Kirk and some red shirts arrive, and they begin to scan to see if, what's going on inside the cabin. And then the door opens, and Spock's fine. And, of course, Kirk is somewhat stunned and, of course, says, look, don't take this the wrong way, but why aren't you dead? And then McCoy realizes, Spock, he's a Vulcan. He has copper-based blood, not iron-based blood like humans have. He doesn't have red blood cells, and therefore the creature couldn't feed on him. And Spock is, of course, slightly smug about it all, as usual. Like, yes, I'm better than you humans. Did I mention that? Okay, now, then Scotty informs them that the creature has left the ship and is moving away again. Kirk orders pursuit. Then he reinstates Garrovick to duty, telling him, that his hesitation to fire on the creature didn't make any difference in the outcome. And again, we kind of see some of this sort of redundancy or repetition in the script that was mentioned earlier. So they pursue the creature back to the same planet where the Farragut encountered it years ago. And again, we get one of these really abrupt sort of cuts here. Spock states that the creature has clearly come back to this planet to spawn. Now, again, there was no mention before about this thing being ready to give birth or to reproduce, but then suddenly we're told that it is. So again, it feels like there's a scene missing here or something. Spock informs them that the thing may reproduce through fission, and that it may produce thousands of offspring. And of course, thousands of these things roaming through the galaxy would be bad. Kirk suggests that using antimatter may be the only way to destroy it, and he orders some antimatter drawn from the engines and placed in a magnetic field, and then also a canister of blood from medical supply that they will use as bait. Kirk says he's going to beam down to do this himself, of course. Spock questions this, saying that since he doesn't have red blood cells and the creature can't affect him, obviously he's the logical choice to go down. And of course he's right. And of course Kirk overrules him and says, no, I'm doing it anyway. And then he invites Garrovick to join him, and Garrovick, of course, accepts. So they beam down to the planet with the antimatter in this thing here. And then this canister here has the red blood in it. Now, also before they beam down, I forgot. So what they're going to do, of course, is they're going to expose this thing to the antimatter, and an antimatter explosion should annihilate this creature. It'll annihilate anything, but that's going to create a massive explosion. So the Enterprise has to pull away to basically the maximum distance, the maximum range of the transporter. And Spock warns them that at that distance and with an antimatter explosion taking place, that beaming them back, alive or safely is no guarantee. And there's a lot of risk here. He's basically sort of raising the stakes and letting the audience know, hey, this is dangerous. You could die doing this. Now they beam down to the planet, and Kirk sets a detonator on the antimatter device. Then the creature arrives, and it quickly gobbles up all the blood. Now, Kirk tells Garrovick to beam back to the ship. Then Garrovick tries to overpower Kirk and use himself as bait. He tries to go for the old karate chop to the neck bit. But, Kirk's not some random guard. He's Kirk. So, of course, it doesn't work. They wind up wrestling. And Kirk overpowers Garrovick. And when he thrusts Garrovick up against this boulder here, the boulder noticeably moves. It seems to move like an inch or two. So Kirk says, I have no intention of sacrificing myself. I'll wait to the last moment, then beam out. We'll beam out at the last moment and then have them drop the field to destroy the creature. So the creature advances on them, and when it gets close, Kirk orders the beam out. So they teleport out, and then the device is activated, annihilating the creature and presumably a good chunk of the planet too. And back on the Enterprise, the beam out is pretty rough. They fluctuate in and out, of the beam several times, but eventually they are pulled through safely. Now, with the threat over, Kirk orders the Enterprise to rendezvous with Yorktown and deliver the vaccines they're carrying. Then Kirk tells Garrovick that he has several stories about his father to tell Garrovick if he'd like to hear them sometime. And the episode ends there. And Stephen Brooks appeared as Ensign Garrovick. Let's see, Jerry Ayers as Lieutenant Rizzo. And of course, I'm sure you know those other folks. And, overall, I give this one I don't know, I'll give it a B+. As they kind of say in the book, it is quite good, but it does really kind of stumble towards the end. Again, I feel like there were several really abrupt edits, and it feels like they just didn't have enough time to tell the story fully. It happens. It's not like this is the only episode where that's happened. So it's a solid episode, not a great one. All right. Let me take a drink of water here right quick. Hold on. Okay. So let's talk about the production of this episode. Now, Gamesters of Triskelion was planned to film first. Let me there we go. Yeah, so Gamesters of Triskelion was actually planned to be filmed first as the 46th episode. But the rewriting of Obsession went so quickly, and the sets for this episode were minimal compared to Gamesters of Triskelion, which had several new sets that had to be built, and they also had several guest stars that had to be cast and stuff like that, whereas there weren't a lot of substantial parts in here aside really from Garrovick. I mean, Rizzo has a few lines. Gwegnar says, Classic Comics, your X link for this live stream doesn't work. It is pointing to the studio version. Okay. Wonder why that is. Let's see. Okay. Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how to repair it right now. I'd really have to pretty much stop the stream to fix it. Let me try this. Hold on right quick. try this very quickly. See if I can post it right quick. Thank you for letting me know, Gwagnar. I appreciate it. Actually, let me just do it this way. This will be quicker. So okay. Hopefully that will do the job. All right, so getting back to this, and again, thank you for letting me know. All right, where was I? Okay, yeah, so they didn't really have much casting to do for this episode. And as a result, Obsession actually wound up being produced first. But in some lists where you see, because it was originally supposed to be 47th and Triskelion was supposed to be 46th, in some lists they're switched. But in reality, actually, Obsession was produced first. Okay, now Ralph Sineski had become the third of the three sort of main rotating directors that Star Trek was using, alternating with Mark Daniels and Joseph Pevney. And he was given this assignment. This was Sineski's fourth Star Trek, following his excellent work in This Side of Paradise, Metamorphosis, and Bread and Circuses. Now, Stephen Brooks, there he is. He plays the pivotal role of Ensign Garavik and had just finished 2 seasons playing Jim Rhodes, presumably not Jim Rhodes, who's War Machine in the MCU, but a different Jim Rhodes, on the Ephraim Zimbalist TV series, The FBI, where he was sort of the sidekick. This was the 14th time that Sineski and Brooks had worked together, with the director having requested him in person for this role. Or personally for this role. They had first met on a pair of episodes for the New York-based drama The Nurses, in which Brooks had a recurring role. And I guess Sineski had directed some episodes of The FBI as well. And I mean, it's not really important or anything, but you may recall Ephraim Zimbalist did appear in an episode of Babylon 5. Or actually a couple episodes in, what was it, season 4? I think it was in season 4. Okay, so regarding his decision to leave the TV show The FBI after 2 seasons, because the show was pretty successful. Okay, Wagner says, yes, that works now. Okay, good. Yeah, I mean, I didn't think I did anything different, so I don't know why that link wasn't working. Oh, well. We will survive, I think. Okay, so Brooks said, quote, acting is just playing cops and robbers. It's basically childish. I don't want to fall into the TV trap and just go from one series to another. And these days, I just seem to spend a lot of time following Ephraim around and just standing with my hands in my pockets. So I guess he was kind of bored on the show. And also, I will say, this is the only quote they have from him. Or actually, I think there is maybe one other one. But there isn't much from him, like there's no quotes from him about working on this episode or working with the cast, which they usually have for guest stars, or the prominent ones, the important ones anyway. And so when that happens, I usually take it to mean that he probably died before this book was made. I'm assuming. I haven't looked up to check. Now, Jerry Ayers played Ensign Rizzo. Tony Rizzo. And this was not his first episode of Star Trek. He was in Arena. If you go back and watch Arena, when they're down on the planet of Cestus 3, there's after they've been bombarded, and all the explosions, or maybe it's right before it, there's a red shirt who says, hey, Captain, I see something, and then he gets zapped and disintegrated. And that was him. So he has died before, and he dies again here in this episode. He would go on to have recurring roles on Dynasty, as well as daytime soap operas General Hospital and The Bold and the Beautiful. And then also, as I mentioned, Eddie Paskey had already appeared in 44 episodes, usually in a red shirt. Oh, it's Lieutenant Leslie. I'm sorry, not Kelly. Lieutenant Leslie. He later said, quote, "I was very careful to be somewhere else when the script called for someone in a red shirt to die. Because I was on the set all the time as Shatner's stand-in, I knew that was in the script. I didn't want to have something happen to my character because that would have put me out of the show." For his his 45th Star Trek appearance, Paskey is one of the men who was killed by the vampire cloud. Regardless, he would continue to stand in for Shatner and would return for 15 more episodes, often playing Leslie, somehow resurrected from the dead. I swear, I'm pretty sure he died in a previous episode before this, but it doesn't say it here. I know, I'd have to go back and watch them all again. Actually, I do believe there's at least, because he usually wears a red shirt, but I think there are maybe a couple episodes where he wore like a gold and at least one where he wore a blue. So maybe it was one of those episodes, and so he was maybe supposed to be a different character. I don't know. Okay, filming began on October 9th, 1967. And this was, largely, I mean, it wasn't a bottle show, but it did have a minimum as far as new sets being made. Basically, this alien landscape, and that's it. There with this kind of desert-looking terrain. Now, apparently, when they began filming on this episode, Shatner had a cold, and he had a stuffy nose. Ralph Sineski recalled, quote, "The creature and the smoke it gave off was a problem. Today, you would just do it all post-production with opticals, but budgetary demands were that you try to do it live to save money. Trying to direct smoke to move where you want it to and at the pace that you want it to isn't easy." Now, one of the special effects guys, Jim Rugg, said, quote, "We made clouds by having a smoke machine and having very good discipline on the stage. With no opening and closing of doors, no fans, you could hang smoke in the air just long enough to get a good shot." Stephen Brooks, who was being upstaged by a large puff of smoke, said, quote, "Acting is basically childish, but there is still something difficult about putting one foot in front of the other when you're on stage or before a camera." The second half of the day was spent in Kirk's quarters, requiring a company move back to Stage 9. And apparently, at this point, Shatner was actually starting to develop a fever. Sineski spotted a marked difference in the caliber of the writing since his last visit. He said, quote, "This was my first Star Trek without Gene Coon as producer. And, of course, as writer. I, for one, certainly missed him. I cannot speak for the other directors and the other productions, but I can definitely say that there was a drop in quality from this side of Paradise, Metamorphosis, and Bread and Circuses to the other two episodes I directed the second season, which would be Obsession as well as Return to Tomorrow." Yeah, Return to Tomorrow is not exactly a highlight, being a backdoor pilot for Gary X, basically. And I ascribe the reason for this drop to be partly caused by the lack of Gene Coon's stewardship of the writing of the scripts and the rest of the impossible expectations that the episodes in the series could always, the studio always expected these shows to be filmed in 5.5 days, which was almost impossible. Sineski used a scene from this episode as an example of how redundant dialogue suddenly appeared in the scripts. The scene is the one where Spock and McCoy confront Kirk in his quarters about his obsessive behavior, a scene which runs for several minutes. Sineski said, quote, "The scene starts with a strong confrontation between McCoy and Kirk, but after Spock enters, we get 2.5 minutes of exposition. And those 2.5 minutes cover the same material that they had just presented in a 2-minute scene between Kirk and McCoy. There's a big difference between having your characters explain a situation or dramatize it." The performances and the blocking are uniformly excellent. I mean, I don't know. Honestly, I don't think Stephen Brooks is really all that great. I mean, he's serviceable, but I wouldn't say he was a great actor or anything. But the regulars are, for the most part, pretty good. They are quite good. Note how Shatner earned to place Kirk, both while lying on his bed and sitting on his desk, and especially as DeForest Kelly delivers his "And you know what what's the greatest monster of them all?" line. Shatner, as Kirk, turns off his communications monitor and swivels his chair to face his challenger, silent, cool, his eyes daring McCoy to say it. Guilt. The scene plays beautifully with director and actors in perfect harmony. This episode actually ties the record for the highest number of red shirt casualties, with 4 confirmed dead. The Changeling and the Apple both have 4 red shirts dying in them as well. Yeah, I remember the Apple because that did have a high body count. Day 5, Friday, October 13th. Shatner's cold symptoms were now diminishing, but now Leonard Nimoy was getting sick. Because his cold symptoms were less noticeable this day, Shatner recorded his log voiceovers for the episode. They mentioned the quordrazine, which I already talked about, being used again. Okay. Now, Sineski said Gene Coon had told me that he literally wrote every script, that he would hire a writer, buy a story, have the writer write it, then he would use that as the first draft, and then he would basically just rewrite the thing. But once Gene left, they never had a script again as good as his. An example of this is the scene where Spock talks to Stephen Brooks's character. The main reason for having this is that it wasn't as tight as it would have been if Gene Coon had been handling the final rewrite. There would have been a lot better reason for him being there than just needing to be there. Now, Justman, as you will recall, had requested Coon find a better reason for Spock's presence. And that's from the rewriting stuff I skipped earlier. Okay. Now, as for the action that follows the dialogue, Spock's behavior bordered on illogical. Let me go ahead and skip to that scene here. Let's see. Yeah, go back. There we go. Yeah, so it's just kind of odd that Spock, goes out of his way to again, sort of massage Garavic's feelings and basically tell him, hey, man, don't beat yourself up. It's not you. Just kind of odd for Spock to do it. I don't think it's an egregious, out of character thing to do necessarily, but a bit puzzling. For Kirk, I think it makes more sense because, we've established by this point that he does have, feelings for Kirk and does have affection for him, but he barely knows Garavik. Okay. Despite all its obstacles, Obsession was finished on schedule and within budget. Now in this episode, obviously you can't hear anything, but they did recycle a lot of the music from the Doomsday Machine. The da dun da dun da dun. They use that a lot in this. And the cost of this episode was $170,871, which in today's money would be, or actually, no, in 2013 money when this was published, it would be 1.2 million. Probably more like 5 million now. This episode got some pretty good reviews overall. The positive reviews helped Obsession when it came time for AC Nielsen to do its national nose count. So this aired December 15th, 1967. And in the first half hour from 8:30 to 9, yeah, it was the usual story. Gomer Pyle absolutely crushed the competition with a 39.5% audience share. Star Trek was a distant second at 28%, slightly ahead of Hondo, which had 24.3%. And then in the second half hour, the gap narrowed slightly. CBS was showing the Friday night movie, which got 30.9%, and Star Trek had 29.4%. So, a pretty solid finish. Ralph Sineski said, quote, I liked doing that one. And despite the fact that we had the tighter schedule, that one wasn't as harassing as the others had been because it was all on the soundstage. And there were just nice, intimate scenes to play. And the fact that Stephen Brooks was in it, who had already directed in the FBI and the Nurses, I asked for him specifically. He was a delight. He was a really lovely, sensitive person. He was a very good actor. And if you really look at his scenes, he's not just saying lines. His reactions and his line readings are really very nice. I mean, I'm not convinced. I mean, I don't want to say he's terrible, but I don't know. I wouldn't say he was one of their stronger guest stars here. He comes across as actually kind of inexperienced to me, it seems like, but he had plenty of previous time on television. Okay, so that is going to wrap up Obsession. So the next episode, which I should be doing next week, will be the Gamesters of Triskelion. Now, let me talk a quick bit about what's going to be coming up. So, as I mentioned, I'm in a graduate program and had to step away, so I'm going to be free probably from now through around the end of January. After January, I will probably be getting too busy again. We'll see how it goes, but I will probably have to stop doing this again, at least for a while. So I hope to get through season 2 by the end of January. I think I can do it. I think it'll be fine. And then, maybe I'll take up, I should graduate in August. And so hopefully then I can take up season 3 later in the year and maybe finish that out. We'll see. But anyway, thank you to everyone for tuning in during the live stream. If you haven't, please do hit the like on the stream if you haven't already, and please do sub to the channel. And what else? I'll probably also start doing my Sunday night live streams again, probably 7 o'clock Sunday nights, starting this weekend. And again, I'll probably do that through the holidays. And yeah, I guess that'll be it for now. Again, thanks to everyone for watching during the stream and those who will catch it on a rewatch. And I hope you all have a good night, and I will see you next week.